Good evening, everyone. Gordon Causey, as always, here on my miserable, pathetic little, call it a podcast, call it a video channel, call it whatever you want. No production values, just me and Candy the Wonder Pup. Sporting a new look. I shaved my head back down. I'm back to the way I looked back at the end of last year, at the end of 2023. Finally, bit of an experiment. I wanted to see how much hair I had left and what color it was. And I let it grow out for a few months. And I'm back to the chrome dome look. Much cleaner, much preferable for me. I think I look a lot better this way than with mangy hair that I'm trying to smooth out because it tends to frizz. Anyway, enough about me. Candy doesn't care whether I have hair or whether I don't. All she cares about is what's in my pocket. So sit down, shake, speak. Oh, that's a good one. There you go. Candy is taken care of. I'll start out by saying the usual. Thank you for everyone who's been liking my videos. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed, 900 and whatever it is. The march to 1,000. Will I get there? Won't I? Time will tell. I wanted to talk tonight about Jordan Peterson, who is a compelling figure. And I don't follow him extensively, but I do follow him. I do watch a lot of his videos. And I'm amazed at the fact that I'm of the same generation. I think Jordan Peterson is kicking, I think he's 60 now. I'd have to check his year of birth, but I think he's probably born 1964. I think he's just a couple years older than myself. I saw a recent podcast where he mentioned being 60. And I'm going to be 58 this year. So generationally, we're of the same generation. And he's a Canadian. And I grew up at a time when Canadians were often viewed as being the poor cousins of Americans, the stupid cousins of Americans, is how we would typically be depicted in TV shows, popular culture. On MASH, they did an episode where there was an interaction between the MASH unit, the 4077, the American Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, and a Canadian unit. And the Canadians were painted as very simplistically, we'll call you if we ever need a hockey puck. And how's it, an A, a lot of A. Well, A. And so seeing Jordan Peterson vault into the heights of the social media sphere, certainly, and the academic sphere, and being interviewed by Bill Maher, being interviewed by Pierce Morgan, Douglas Murray, and on Sky News in Australia, and he's blown up into this thing, and he's Canadian. I just find that swells me with a little bit of Canadian patriotic pride. We're not just hewers of wood and drawers of water. And there's no questioning in my mind Jordan Peterson's intellect. My little intellect doesn't come close. I can't hold a candle to Jordan Peterson, but I do enjoy listening to him. And I think it's a case where I'm well read enough that I'm able to pull meaning out of what he's saying that perhaps others may not be, who aren't perhaps as well read. Just some examples. I have read Dostoevsky. I've read the brothers. He references often in his talks the Brothers Karamazov, which is a book I read many years ago. Yes, Sharunian Allegiance asks if Mr. Clean, is that you? Yeah, I'm back to the way I first shaved my head back in my 30s when I first started to realize that, oh my gosh, I'm doing a comb over. And that was the first time I shaved my head in and around the age of 30. And for the past 10, 15 years, I've been shaving it right down to the wood. And I only just recently, back around December, January, decided to let it grow out. But anyway, I covered that at the beginning. Uh, you're bald in the crowd too? I don't know what that question means, Sharunian. But at any rate, uh, uh, yeah, a little bit. A little bit. I'll tell a little joke, seeing as everyone seems to like my jokes. It's said that those who have a receding hairline, which, if you saw my hair when I let it grow out, I'm decidedly receding. There's very little, just a few strands here and there across the top of my head. So it was said that those who were had a receding hairline, that they were very smart, intellectual, smart individuals, and that those who have male pattern baldness, where you just go bald at the crown of the head, that they're very sexy. So being one who's losing hair both at the front and at the crown, what that means is I just think I'm sexy. Any rate, back to Jordan Peterson. So I'm able to glean, when he talks about Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, I've read it. He also references a lot Crime and Punishment, another seminal work by Dostoevsky, a famous Russian author, something of a contemporary of Charles Dickens in the English-speaking world. And I'm something of a bibliophile. I've read a lot of books, but there's tons I have not read. Obviously, there's just too many books out there. When I was younger, when I was in my 20s, I decided, the amount of literature out there in the world is just far too extensive. So I'm going to just consume quality stuff. I'm going to read Dickens. I'm going to read Dostoevsky. I'm going to read Thackeray. I'm going to read Fielding. I'm going to read these classics of literature that have stood the test of time. And now, 30 plus years later, I'm finding that grounding I received in those books is helpful when I come across an individual, a psychologist like Jordan Peterson, who I consider to be more than just a psychologist. I consider him something of a philosopher. He's interested in examining things and tearing them apart, and not just in the realm of psychology, although he uses his background in psychology to frame his understanding of things, at least somewhat, and maybe a lot. At any rate, the question I'm asking in the subject line to this, which I'll admit, Jordan Peterson is something of a celebrity, certainly in the YouTube online world. And he's done a number of lectures on the Bible, on Genesis, on Exodus, on the gospel accounts. And I've watched a number of them. I've watched about the first half of an interview he did with a student of philosophy, now a graduate, probably has a PhD, very young man by the name of Alex O'Connor, who has a podcast himself, which is called Cosmic Skeptic. And the two of them are going back and forth, and it is absolutely fantastic. I've got Gerald Sumner giving me a peace, love, and the sunglass sign. Peace and love to you too. And I really enjoy the engagement, so please don't feel shy about using the live chat. Sharunian and Gerald and anyone else who happens on. But the question I'm asking in the subject line is Jordan Peterson a Christian? And that seems to be a recurring question that he confronts. Are you a Christian? Are you a Christian? Do you believe in the resurrection? Do did the Exodus account as presented in the Bible, is that a historical event that actually happened? If you went back in time and were witnessing it, would you see a mass exodus of hundreds of thousands of Israelites heading out into the wilderness toward wherever Mount Sinai is? Would you see this? Would you see them wandering in the desert for 40 years? And Peterson's answers are quite often very convoluted. I heard him at one point. I think the question that was posed to him was, do you believe in the resurrection? And in a somewhat flippant manner, he goes, yeah, sure, why not? And it's because I believe my sense of the man is that he doesn't like the question. And I think the reason that he doesn't like the question is, the question, are you a Christian? What does it mean? Because this term Christian is adopted by, I profess myself a Christian, but Jehovah's Witnesses profess themselves to be Christians. Mormons profess themselves to be Christians, Seventh-day Adventists. You have such a wide spectrum of individuals professing themselves to be Christians, and you have different interpretations of the Bible, different interpretations of who Jesus was. What the Jehovah's Witnesses believe in terms of who Jesus was is diametrically opposed to what a Pentecostal would believe. And yet they both will put the label Christian on themselves. So Jordan Peterson will be asked, are you a Christian? And he might say, yeah, sure, why not? But what does it mean? And words are important because different people have different definitions for the same word. I'll give an example. I was in my 20s, and I was working for a marketing company back in the 90s, back in 94 or so. And I was out at a dinner function with a couple of clients for the company I worked for. And there were 7 or 8 of us at the table. And it became known that it came up in the conversation that I had spent about 10 years, close to 10 years, growing up in the United States of America. I had lived in New York City when I was very young, then New Jersey from 1970 to 1975. I'd spent another year living out in Portland, Oregon. So I have something of an American. I can see the world the way an American sees the world. And I was asked by someone at the table, what do you see as the difference between Americans and Canadians? Because they're so much alike in terms, we share, for the most part, aside from Quebec, English-speaking Canada shares the same language. We share much of the same media. We watch the same TV shows. We follow the same sports. So they said, what's the difference between Americans and Canadians? And I said that one of the primary differences of which from my perspective, was that I found Canadians to be far more conservative than Americans. And that was met with shock and surprise by those at the table, but it's because of their understanding of the word conservative. And their understanding of the word wasn't wrong. They were approaching the word conservative from a political context, from a political framework. And from a political context, Canada's Conservative Party would be considered left of the Democrats in the United States. So they couldn't understand, how can you see Americans or Canadians being more conservative than Americans? Americans are far more conservative than us. And the context, how I meant it, was in terms of social interaction. Every time we had moved into a house, whether it be in New York, we lived in 2 different addresses in New Jersey, one in Wyckoff, one in Glen Rock. When we moved to Portland, Oregon, whenever we moved into a new house, those 1, 2, 3, 4 times, within 2-3 days, 10, 15, 20 times, the doorbell would ring, there would be a knock on the door, and it would be our neighbors introducing themselves. Hi, I'm Bob. This is my wife, Mary. These are our kids, Janie and Bobby. Do you go to a church? Maybe you'd like to come to our church. Do you need any help with anything? Do you know how to get around? Do you need to know where the grocery store is? This, that. Americans were coming, and they wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood, and they wanted to get to know their neighbors. Contrast that with when we moved into Canada, and we wouldn't actually get into a conversation with our neighbors until the wintertime when we were out shoveling snow. It's quite a dumping, eh? Oh, yeah. And then a conversation would ensue. And it was in that respect So words are significant. Sorry for the long, winding, diversionary story, but bringing it back. When Jordan Peterson is asked, are you a Christian? It depends on what that question means to the person who's asking it. Do you, and typically, and he has said this, and he says it in this most recent podcast that dropped within the last 2-3 days, this one with Alex O'Connor, who is a brilliant young kid. His wisdom belies his years. I find he's toe to toe with Jordan Peterson, hashing out these things. And what Peterson said to this Alex O'Connor is that what the question really means is, are you in my camp? And I did an earlier video talking about racism and tribalism, and there's this, it's somewhat the default position, in my opinion, of human nature, is to seek out your tribe. And that can, your tribe, one of the ways we differentiate and we associate ourselves with a tribe is by religion. Could be by race, could be by language, could be by territory. There are all manner of different ways in which we assign ourselves to a tribe. And religion is one of them. So people will ask Jordan Peterson, are you a Christian? And they're trying to bring him into their tribe. And I think Jordan Peterson has done more to rehabilitate Christianity, broadly speaking, than any public person in my lifetime. Absolutely. Because Christianity, somewhat in my earlier years in the 1980s, Christianity was somewhat hijacked by individuals like Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye and their PTL, praise the Lord, pass the loot, pay the lady, the PTL network. And then there was Jerry Falwell and his moral majority. And what's the other guy? Jimmy Swaggart. And even nowadays, there's this Kenneth Copeland, who, you know, I'm breathing the wind of God on COVID. You're gone and you'll never come back. Or back in the day, it was Ernest Angley. I want to kind of put Kenneth Copeland in his, or Joel Osteen with this prosperity gospel, and kind of taking Christianity and blending it in with this law of attraction. Live in an attitude of gratitude. What you put out into the universe, you know, it'll manifest back into your life. You have all these ideas. And so I think Jordan Peterson, by basically diving deeply into the Bible and pulling back the layers on the biblical corpus, on all the books of the Bible and all the stories of the Bible, that he is rejuvenating and rehabilitating Christianity. And I think it's worth mentioning the fact that for years, for a very long time, Christianity was very authoritative in nature, going back to Roman times, when the Roman Catholic Church ruled the world, or certainly the English-speaking world. I'm going to read what Miss Christie has to say. I love that Jordan Peterson is such an amazing intellectual, agree with you, and expresses his belief in God. He's such a great role model for young people, and he is. But to get to something you're writing there, Miss Christie, expresses his belief in God. He doesn't just express a belief in God, he actually defines, he attempts to put some meat on the bones of what does it mean to believe in God. Does it mean that you believe in this omniscient, omnipotent, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-wise father figure? Because in Christianity, we typically use the term father. Jesus refers to God as Abba, which is the Aramaic word for daddy. It's a familial word as opposed to father or daddy. And so he tries to put some meat on this very mystical word. What is God? What does it mean to believe in God? And how does it manifest itself in our lives? and his understanding and his ability to pull things back. And again, I think Christianity was hijacked by these Jim Bakkers, Jimmy Swaggarts, Jerry Falwell types, and even to a degree, Oral Roberts or Billy Graham, another famous name that went back all the way to the 50s. And Mish Christie's writing, yes, he gets into the nitty gritty of everything. And I think that's important because the details matter. Like when I was sitting at that restaurant and my work colleagues and our clients said, you spent some years growing up in the United States. What's the difference between Americans and Canadians? And I said, well, I find Canadians far more conservative. And what does that mean? What do you mean by that? Americans are more conservative than Canadians, not the other way around. Yes, from a political perspective, that argument can be made, but socially is the way I meant it. And I had to flesh it out. I had to explain what I meant when I referred to Canadians as being more conservative. And that's what Peterson does in a more meaningful way, in terms of something as important as what at the end of the day is the basic fabric upon which our Western civilization is built, which is on Judeo-Christian teaching, it's based on the Bible. And we have gotten so far away from the Bible. And there's a lot of reasons why we have gotten so far away from the Bible. And the reason and it's such a difficult topic, I've already left a point I was trying to make, going all over the place. I was talking earlier about, how there was, I think it was around 355, somewhere in the 300s, 4th century, when Rome ostensibly took over the Christian faith. So for the first 100, 200, 300 years of Christianity, Rome was trying to stamp it out. Periods of persecution waxed and waned. There were periods of tolerance, times of harsh persecution against the church. And then Constantine came along. And the way I tend to frame it is Constantine said, we can't beat them, so let's take it over. Let's make Rome a Christian empire, and let's organize this new faith, this faith that's been around 200-300 years, and let's Romanize it, or romanticize it, Romanize it. Let's make it Roman. Let's give it a Roman structure. And in doing that, they took their old pontificate, which was for the Roman religion, and they replaced the pontificate maximus, the head of their priestly class. And they said, now we have the Pope, the pontiff. And then we'll have the College of Cardinals answering to the pontificate maximus, or the Pope. And we'll have under the cardinals, we'll have the bishops. And then under the bishops, we'll have the priests. Under the priests, we'll have the brotherly and sisterly orders. And then we'll have the laity, the vast massive majority. And you have this very hierarchical, can't say that word, hierarchy structure, very Roman in nature. And there's a tendency, I think, to want to demonize or angelicize everything. Everything's got to be great or it's horrible. And I'm guilty of that. I tend to look very disparagingly upon the manner in which Rome managed the Christian faith, the way they administered it. I think there were a lot of evils, but then I think equally it's got to be noted that some good came out of it, because by putting this structure in place, it lends order. And what we've seen since the Protestant Reformation, which started in around the 1500s, the Protestant Reformation tore down that order. And now, what have we had since that? We've got the Methodists, we've got the Lutherans, we've got the Pentecostals, we've got the Reformed, we've got the Calvinists, we've got the Jehovah's Witness, we've got the there literally have to be 1,000 plus denominations within Christianity, the Latter-day Saints. The authority has been completely washed away, and now everyone's an expert. Everyone knows, and everyone there, the voices out there are countless, claiming to be a prophetic voice. The Spirit has told me, and I'm going to give it to you. This is what God is saying to you and to everyone, because God spoke to me through the Spirit, and this is a prophetic word, and I am a prophet, and I know what God thinks and God says and what is required of every man, woman, and child on the face of the planet Earth. And that's scary. That is scary. And when you eliminate any sense of hierarchy and any sense of order, it becomes a free-for-all. I think Carl Jung, was a student of Sigmund Freud and is considered perhaps the pinnacle of psychoanalytic thought, he said that the natural progression of Protestantism is for everyone to become a church unto themselves. Protestant comes from the word protest. So Martin Luther went up and he nailed his thesis statement to the cathedral door, and it was a protestation. He was protesting against the abuses that Rome was engaged in. And then from there we get Lutheranism and Calvinism and all these other isms, Methodism, and again, it goes out. There's got to be 1,000 different denominations. We have the Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. Even within, a division will happen, and that within that division, more division happens, and that's an unfortunate reality. And if you go into John's Gospel, chapter 17, I'm fairly confident in saying that it's chapter 17. Jesus makes a prayer before he goes to the cross, and he says, as I am in you, are in me, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, so too he wishes for his disciples and his followers to be unified. And yet look at the world we live in. There's hardly any unification at all. And what is happening in the world as a result of that? Now we have a new religion that's taken over. This relative materialism, put whatever label you want on it. And again, I've got Mish Christie, I've got Gerald Sumner, I've got Sharunian, I've got a number of people watching. If anything I say, if you want to challenge me on it, if you want to comment, please do. The live chat is on, and I always enjoy the engagement because it helps lend some flavor. It's difficult. Doing these videos is fun, but it's a lot more fun when I know that my voice, I'm not just talking into the void, and that there are actually people listening. Anyway, so is Jordan Peterson a Christian? I think in the broadest possible spectrum, I would say yes, he is a Christian. He has a Judeo-Christian framework of belief. I think his biblical series speaks to that fact. He may not ascribe to Pentecostalism or to Methodism or strictly to Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, but he speaks with such amazing authority, and he goes into the biblical corpus. He goes into the Old Testament, New Testament, and pulls back layers of meaning. And in doing so, the second question I asked, is Jordan Peterson a prophet? I don't know the man. Never met him. If it were to ever happen, I would be thrilled. It's part of the reason I do these videos, is because who knows what can come of it. Thrusting my voice into the public discourse, we'll see what happens. But leaving that aside, it's more of a wish and a dream. But I am fairly confident in saying I do not think that Jordan Peterson would ever proclaim himself to be a prophet. But I would say, from my perspective, he is very much a prophetic voice, very much in line with the prophets of the Old Testament, with Isaiah, with Elijah, with Elisha, with countless prophets: Amos, Zechariah, Ezekiel, Daniel. I can't name them all. I don't know how amazing it would be. I'm watching this conversation that he's had, and I would invite anyone to watch it. It's on Jordan Peterson's own channel here on YouTube, and it's Alex O'Connor. And Alex O'Connor has his own podcast entitled Cosmic Skeptic. Far more, that they have production values. It's not miserable, pathetic like my little channel, where the audio sometimes skips because I don't have the most robust internet connection, but it's better than it was a year or so ago. I've upgraded, but I live out in the boonies. Brighton, Ontario is hardly the center of the universe. I'm always reminded there is a passage, and I forget which gospel account it's in. It might be John. That doesn't matter, where one of Jesus's disciples goes to, I can't remember which one. He goes to another individual who eventually becomes a disciple, and he says, "Come, you have to meet this man. We believe he's the Messiah. He's from Nazareth." And this guy who's not yet a disciple says, "Nazareth? Has anything good ever come out of Nazareth?" And I tend to think of that as Brighton. Has anything good ever come out of Brighton? Anyway. Will I ever get to meet Jordan Peterson? Maybe. Who knows? But I just said, I think he is a prophetic voice in the manner of the prophets of the Old Testament. Because if we think about what did the prophets of the Old Testament say? Make right the way of the Lord. Get right with God. You're doing wrong. You're worshiping false idols. You're worshiping false gods. You are sacrificing your children. And where is this going to get us? It's going to get us into hell. It's going to destroy our world. And you can look on that as a literal representation of the northern kingdom of Israel being overtaken by the Assyrians of the Babylonian captivity with the southern kingdom of Judah. You can look at it in a historical, literal perspective, but you can also look at it in a more allegorical, as an archetype, as a meme, where, if you abandon God and you start aiming toward things that are not the pinnacle, not the ideal, not the best, and you start, in the Old Testament, the Israelites living in the land of Canaan started to adopt some of the practices of the broader Canaanite culture, one of which was to sacrifice children to Moloch. Now, you can think of Year One with Jack Black and everyone else who was in that movie, where they're literally throwing people into a fiery god. Or you can look at it in a metaphorical sense. And are we sacrificing our children now? And I would say, yes, we are. We are sacrificing our children now. We are now telling our children, who are not yet even sexual beings, who are prepubescent, that they can choose their gender and that they can have radical mutilating surgeries, hacking off healthy breast tissue or castration, and thus ensuring that they have no life beyond their own, that they can never have offspring. And is that not sacrificing our children? We are descending into hell. And in this fashion, I think very much that Jordan Peterson is a prophetic voice. He is that voice in the wilderness that is saying, get right with God. But forget this, simplistic, invisible man in the sky, omniscient, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-wise, kind of, conceptualized being. But Peterson would frame it as, aim toward the highest, the highest truth, the highest, the highest truth, the most ethical truth, the most essential truths, and aim in that direction. And maybe you'll be off. Maybe you'll be a few degrees off, but at least you'll be moving toward that goal, and you can then make corrections as you go, because it's built into the fabric of reality, that it's built into creation, that you will be corrected, and that if you're aligning yourself properly. And I think one of the best representations of this is when he talks about the story of Jonah in the Bible, which is one of the books of the Bible, Jonah. And many will know the story about Jonah, who was in the belly of the whale or great fish or sea creature, whatever you want. Ancient Hebrew did not have a word for whale. So the actual ancient Hebrew word that was used in that book is great fish. But who cares? Because the meaning of that story is far more than just the literal. There's a far deeper meaning to it that Jordan Peterson expounds on. And none of this comes from myself. This is what I have learned from listening to his lectures and his talks and his podcasts. And he talks about Jonah repeatedly, even with Bill Maher, who Bill Maher looked at it in a very superficial fashion and just made fun of it. Oh, sure, guy goes into a belly of, and that's the extent of your analysis, Peterson would say, is to just look at the gastrointestinal workings of a whale or a fish. And that story is where Jonah receives the word of the Lord, comes to him, call it the voice of his conscience, to go and speak to the Assyrians in the city of Nineveh, the great city, 100 plus thousand people, and to tell them that you're doing wrong. And Jonah, however that voice manifested itself, whether it was a calling, a deep inner feeling, conscious, stick whatever parameters on it you want, but Jonah knew from whence it came. Jonah knew it was the truth, but it was a scary truth, because the Assyrians, the people of Nineveh, were constantly attacking Israel. They were their natural enemies. It was like Sparta and Troy, or it was like Xerxes and Sparta. They were at war. And so Jonah is, you want me to go and tell my natural enemy, our natural enemy, to make themselves right with the Lord? Hey, if you, or you're going to destroy them, They're our enemies. I know you're an infinitely good and compassionate God. You'll spare them if I warn them. Now, I want them gone. So I'm not going to listen to that inner compelling voice I hear telling me to go and to warn them. So instead, what Jonah does is he gets onto a boat and he goes in exactly the opposite direction. Syria is west, and Jonah goes east. Actually, I think I got it backwards. Assyria is east and Jonah goes west. Goes in the opposite direction from that which the voice of God is compelling him to go. And what happens is God throws a storm against the sea. And then Peterson will expound on this further and say, if you don't speak your truth, when you are called upon to speak the truth, if you don't do it, you're going to risk the whole ship. The whole ship is going to start shaking. And that's where his voice is prophetic in my eyes, because he's saying, he does not mince words when he talks about this transgender crap and what we're doing to our children by telling them, oh, if you want to be a girl, you can be a girl. If you're to a boy, and to a boy or to a girl saying, if you want to be a boy, you can be a boy, and saying to the boy, if you want to be a girl, you can be a girl, and we'll hack off your healthy sexual organs, primary and secondary organs, and will allow you to pretend and to fulfill your fantasy of being the opposite sex from that which you are. and he calls it out for what it is. And he will use profane language, and I think, and I applaud him for it when he says, this is fucking disgusting. Apologize. I know a lot of people don't like profanity, and I'm empathetic towards those individuals who I've had comments. People ask me not to swear or to warn when I'm going to swear, and I've tried to warn and I just didn't. So I apologize. But words are simply letters pushed against each other to make a sound. And sometimes, the English language, it's like the palette of colors that an artist uses. And sometimes it applies and can be far more effective than using so-called polite language. I'm going to read what Sharunian wrote. She wrote something about P. Diddy, who I'm not overly familiar with. Beat his ex-girlfriend 8 years ago, the hotel. Now he's sorry all of a sudden. So much hate. Gordon, need to hear your thoughts. I don't know a lot about P. Diddy. And I think, there's a concept within Christianity where Jesus forgives. That's a big message of the cross, is that at whatever point anyone comes to the cross, the figurative cross, whatever point someone comes to that cross, we all have baggage. We all have things we've done wrong. We all have things that we regret. Oh, I could go on for 2-3 hours on this probably. We all have things that I wish I hadn't done that. And it can be very difficult to let go of that. It can be very difficult to put that down. And that's where we have the representation of Jesus on the cross, having taken our sins away from us and making us a new creation. And this is so vitally important. And then what does it talk about in Christianity? If you read the book of the Acts, often Christians are referred to as those who follow the way, followers of the way. Paul, who was Saul of Tarsus, who wrote many of the books of the New Testament, letters to the Romans, Philippians, Colossians, the Thessalonians, and all these different churches that he established. His name was Saul of Tarsus, but originally he was a persecutor of the church. The synagogue and the religious elders in Jerusalem at the time after the resurrection, they were persecuting followers of Christ. And Paul was one of their chief emissaries, and he would go and he would take people away and bring them back where they could be stoned. Stephen, who gave a beautiful, in Acts of the Apostles, Stephen gives a great sermon, taking everything from the history of Moses right on through to Jesus on the cross, proving out Jesus's messianic mission biblically. And he was stoned. And while he was being stoned, Saul of Tarsus, who we also know as Paul, was there. And he was watching the coats. They lay down their coats and they stoned Stephen, and Paul was assenting to it. He stood by and said, all right, you guys go ahead, stone him to death. I got your back. I'll watch your stuff. So he didn't actually throw stones himself, but he assented. He was in agreement with what was happening to Stephen. Going to catch up. Mish Christie, I agree. Sometimes profanity, when not overused, is powerful language. That's my take on it entirely. Plus, I used to be in the Army, and so profanity warning, but one of the most common things you would hear on any course you were on is when they wanted to hammer the stress on you, you'd have some sergeant coming up going, are you fucking shitting me? Private! Oh man, what an experience. Sharunian Allegiance says, Inshallah, Gordon, which my understanding of Inshallah, it's Arabic meaning God willing. And then she's writing Sharunian is writing other words in Arabic that I'm not familiar with. And Arabic has a different lettering system. They don't have our Greek, or rather Roman, alphabet. It doesn't have a Western alphabet. It looks a lot like Sanskrit and other Tamil and other ancient languages, and I can't read it, but Shallah, Aliyah, Wasalam, I don't know what it's saying. Anyway, Sharunian saying, I'm not Muslim, just reading a book by someone named Shalaya Iman. But anyway, where was I? Someone put me back on track. Oh yeah, Jonah. If you don't speak your truth, when you feel compelled, if you go in the other direction, you're going to put the whole ship, you're going to put the whole society, we could extend it, at risk. The storm is going to rage. And look at the world we're living in now. And part of the reason we've gotten to this stage is because Christianity, the foundation upon which our Canadian, American, Western civilization is based, this Judeo-Christian ethic, we've allowed it to be so trivialized, and we've allowed it to be marginalized. And part of the reason that happened is because we abandoned any sense of authoritative structure that Rome had given us. Would things be better if we still had that Roman system? I'm going to say yes. I think it would be better. I think there would still be a lot of flaws, but would we be castrating young boys and radical double mastectomies on young girls? Children? Would we be sacrificing our children? I don't believe so. So I do think that Jordan Peterson is absolutely 100% a prophetic voice. And I think it's because he's taken the biblical corpus and he's read stories like this of Jonah, and he's been able to pull out the proper meaning, and he realizes that if I don't speak my truth, if the government of Ontario is going to compel me to use made-up words like zare, and whatever else, that I'm not going to bow my knee and I'm not going to go along. I'm going to speak truth and speak it loudly and speak it boldly, and I'm going to pick up my cross and go ahead and nail me to it. And that has happened to him. He's lost his clinical practice. They're threatening to take away his ability to hang up a shingle saying that he is a clinical psychologist. And he's fortunate in that he's got such an enormous intellect. And also, he's got a degree of marketing savvy. He knows how to get his voice out there. He knows how to he's smart enough to have figured out how to use Twitter and different social media platforms to build a following. And now he can go and he can do a talk on something like the book of Genesis, and he will sell it out. He'll have 500, 1,000, 1,500 people in an auditorium without an empty seat. And I'm just going to end it by talking about another thing that I've heard him talk about many times. And it's about and again, it's in this most recent one. He touches on it again, and it's the story of Cain and Abel. And this is, again, where I find that the literal interpretation that many Christians insist on takes away from things, because it puts a wall up between people. You mean to tell me that there were two brothers, one named Cain, one named Abel? They were the first brothers, the first naturally born human beings on the planet, because remember, Adam and Eve in the garden story are created beings. And so Cain and Abel are the first naturally born human beings. People have asked the question, did Adam and Eve have a belly button? Because they weren't born out of a womb according to the biblical story. And there's this literal interpretation that some insist on that puts a wall up for others who say, I can't believe that stuff. And so because they refuse to believe it literally, they miss so much of the deeper, more significant, more meaty meaning in the stories that are presented. Did Cain and Abel really exist? Yeah, there were brothers that existed, and I'm sure there was a fratricide, a brotherly killing that existed at one point or another. And maybe it happened literally as described in the book of Genesis, or maybe it was an aggregation of other stories of brotherly brothers killing each other, sibling rivalry. But the story goes that Cain and Abel are both making sacrifice to God. You've got Cain, who's tilling the ground, and he's taking of the fruit of the ground and offering it up as a sacrifice to God. And Abel is a keeper of sheep and livestock, and he's taking the best of his flock and he's offering it to the Lord. And the Lord had favor, God had favor on Abel's offering, but not so much for Cain. It's presented that Cain's sacrifices were somewhat wanting. They didn't have blood in them. There was no blood in his sacrifice. We've heard, I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into this endeavor. So Cain's sacrifice didn't have it. His sacrifices had no blood, sweat, and tears in them, but Abel's did. And so God looked favorably upon Abel. Everything was wonderful for Abel. For Cain, not so much. And Cain's pretty pissed off, and so he actually has the temerity to go to the creator of all things and says, hey, come on, man, I'm breaking my back here, I'm laying out my sacrifices, but everything's working out for Abel but not for me. What's the deal? And God basically says to him, look, pal, if you do well, if you make proper sacrifices, will you not be rewarded? Why don't you go back and think about this for a few decades, and maybe you'll figure it out. Put some more blood, sweat, tears, put more focus on your sacrifices. Giving up. Sacrifice means to give up, which is something we do in today's world. We sacrifice our time by going to work. So we sacrifice in order to get something later, money. Sacrifice is a central theme of human existence. We have to sacrifice. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. And so Cain, and God further says to Cain, he says, beware, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you. And the word desire in the original Hebrew denotes sexual desire. And when you talk about sexual desire, you talk about the creative process. Something is being created in you, Cain, and it's not good. You need to go into a cave or something and meditate and think on this and, get yourself oriented back in the right direction, or bad things are going to happen. But Cain doesn't do that. Cain goes and he murders his brother. And there's a lot more to that teaching that, again, Jordan Peterson pulls the layers back on it. And I do believe there's a book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes where it says, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything is just vanity. Everything is just chasing the wind. Do I think that Jordan Peterson is discovering things that nobody has ever discovered before? Absolutely not. I think in ancient times, people understood the deeper, significant meaning to so many of these stories, be it of Jonah, Cain and Abel, the Exodus account. They understood the deep, significant, and profound meanings to these stories. And I think over the last 150, 200 years, with the way that religion has been trivialized by our culture, that we've lost it. And now we have individuals insisting that you have to believe everything literally. You have to believe every literal point, or you're not saved, your salvation. And people assume they take on the mantle of God, and they sit on the throne of judgment, and they say, you're not saved. You're going to end up in the lake of fire because I know. And That brings up another point, and this is why I could go on for 2 or 3 hours. It is said in the Bible, one of the Ten Commandments is, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." However, take, the word that is translated into English as take, can equally be translated into the English word carry. You shall not carry the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And the way I would frame it is, you shall not put it on as if to say, I know exactly what God thinks. Because my understanding, my interpretation, my doctrine is superior to every other doctrine out there. And so if you don't follow my belief, my doctrine, my creeds, then you're lost, you're damned, you're going to end up in a lake of fire. And that's what gets people pushing back against religion. And that ultimately is what leads us to a situation that we're in now, where we can't, the broader culture, we're being told by the Church of Scientism that gender is merely a societal construct. You can be whatever you want to be. And we've lost definitions, and we've created a new religion. And it's a religion that's leading us to damnation. And voices like Jordan Peterson are saying, get yourself back on the path. Start following the way. What I was referencing earlier. The word Christian didn't come about sometime later at a place called Antioch, which I believe is in modern day Turkey. That was the first place where this term Christian was used. Prior to that, everyone was just a follower of the way. And I'm going to watch the end of this podcast that he did. I've watched about half. It's over 2 hours long. But to wrap things up, I'm going to read through what's being written, because I have a new person, Simple Mind. I love that group. I love the movie The Breakfast Club. The Western world needs a resurgence of Christianity now. Amen. We're being overwhelmed by non-Christians daily, especially in Canada. Preserve the West. I will state categorically that the reason the Western world has done so much better than every other part of the world, have we exploited other parts of the world? Absolutely. But why have we been in a position to exploit? And I think it's based on our Judeo-Christian ethic. We're not perfect. But it's often been said by smarter people than me that the perfect is the enemy of the good. And because what we have is good but not perfect, everyone wants to tear down everything, including the good parts. And this is the situation we're in. We're being overwhelmed by non-Christians daily, especially in Canada. Preserve the West. Sharunian says, I always get compelled that most religious ideologists, people, tend to commit more crime than atheists. A lot of people, wolves in sheep's clothing, and they are out there. You have to be discerning. And I would say to anyone listening to me, I'm not a prophet. I'm not anything. I make no assertions that God spoke to me and God said this, and that this interpretation is, I try to be as broad as I can, but what it's about is about following the way. And, once you orient yourself to the highest possible good, look after the orphans and widows. That's a common exhortation by the prophets of the Old Testament. Look after the vulnerable. Look after the orphans and widows. Look after the most needy in your society. Which gets me on to what my next video is going to be about how we've gotten into this mess that we're in with Justin Trudeau as the worst prime minister this country has ever seen. But that's for my next video. I do not believe genuinely in that. I think the number of true atheists, I think a lot of people espouse an atheistic worldview simply because they've been programmed to believe that atheists are the smart people. Bill Maher is a really smart guy. I think he's a very shallow person, to be entirely honest, but he comes across, he's got a quick wit. And so people say he's smart, and he professes himself an atheist. George Carlin, who's a brilliant man, great wordsmith, but he looked at religion very superficially. And he made a great career out of it by being a wordsmith, by parsing language, and by uncovering the absurdity in so much of our language. Why do you get onto a plane and not, do you want to get on the plane? No, I don't want to get on. I want to get in the plane. It's a little too windy on the plane. These kinds of things. Why do we say throw up? You don't throw up, you throw down. Look at your shoes. I mean, George Carlin was brilliant, but he and Bill Maher and people like this, Richard Dawkins, have Neil deGrasse Tyson, have created this broader cultural view that, smart people are atheists. And I consider myself to be a smart person, so I'm going to call myself an atheist too, because atheists are smart. Atheists can be smart, they can be dumb. I'm going to read Simple Mind. I don't see that, but I do see more people who are religious being ethnocentric and or racist than an atheist, even though racism is a sin in the New Testament. Amen, brother, sister. I have no use for racism, but I think it's a default of our fallen human condition to be tribal in nature. And one of the ways people manifest their tribalism is to seek out those who look like them, meaning how much melanin do you have in your skin? Who cares? There's a reason why in the Bible there is no physical description given of Jesus whatsoever. You can bet your sweet Bibby that if it was important, it would have been written down. If Jesus's physical appearance, if his skin tone mattered, if his height mattered, if his eye color mattered, if his hair color mattered, if any of these things mattered, they would have been written down. They do not. Miss Christie, Jordan is prophetic because he understands human nature and history. I think he brings his background in clinical psychology, which is a bit of a fuzzy science. It's not entirely a hard science. It requires a lot of introspection. It requires a lot of, it's not hard and fast. It's incredibly layered. And I think that aids him so much when delving into something like the Bible, diving into the books of Scripture and trying to uncover those meanings. He's able to take his sharp analytic mind and pull back the layers the same way he would when he would be engaged in psychoanalysis of one of his patients when he had a practice. Sharunian, Neil deGrasse Tyson is pseudo intellectual. Just because he's got a PhD doesn't mean anything. In terms of Neil deGrasse Tyson, what I'll tend to do is I don't like to call Neil deGrasse Tyson smart or dumb. I'll listen to the ideas that he espouses and then decide for myself whether I agree with that specific idea or not, divorced from him, the person. And the same thing with Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, I'll criticize him. Something I think he did that I thought was cheap. The Sports Illustrated has their annual swimsuit edition, something I used to hang from my locker when I was back in high school. I still remember one picture. Wow. Still, teenage boy. Oh, can't wait for that swimsuit edition. And they had on their cover what I'll call a plus-sized model. And on his Twitter account, Jordan Peterson wrote something, like, "This is beautiful, no," or something very close to that effect. And I thought that was cheap. And I genuinely, if I ever got a chance to meet him, I'd ask him if he had any second thoughts on that, because beauty at the end of the day is in the eye of the beholder. And if you go back to the 14, 15, 1600s during the Renaissance period, they would call large women Rubenesque, and it was, size was considered voluptuous. And I thought the woman in the picture, she had a pretty face. She was large, but I didn't think she was unattractive. And I wondered to what degree Jordan Peterson did that out of a desire for engagement, because now he's an industry unto himself. He has a staff. He has people he has to pay. He's talked about the fact that he has a team around him who organize things to take some of the more mundane and nitty gritty things that just, can, distract you from your larger goals. He has that now taken care of. So he has a staff and he has to pay them. And so he's an industry. And his industry is built on engagement on YouTube, on his, on his this Daily Wire subscriptions that come in. He has advertisers. And so if he's not driving engagement, his revenue stream is going to decline. And I wonder, did he tweet that rather mean tweet out because he made a calculated decision that, well, this will drive engagement. This will get people talking about me. This will get me at the top of the news feed. I might get written about in the National Post. Drive engagement. So continuing to read on, Miss Christie. Okay, I read that already. Sharunian says, okay, I read that already. Sharunian retracted. Now Simple Mind says, will you be doing any religious Christian talks in the future? I really enjoy your videos and I just found your channel recently. You have profound opinions, and as a fellow Canadian, I'm quite proud. Thank you. Don't want to engage in any false modesty. I don't think I'm the smartest guy in the world, obviously. But at the same time, I do think I'm able to put thoughts out in a reasonably coherent manner and that I'm somewhat articulate. And I find that too often Christian voices they look for the most, when you look in the mainstream media, they try and find the most regrettable person they can to kind of say, this is what Christians are like. They're like Ned Flanders. I was thinking about this just today while mowing the lawn, how there was an episode of The Simpsons where they opened up a museum of natural history or something in the town of Springfield, and it showed the evolutionary progress from fish climbing out to, single-celled microbes and progressing to fish and then crawling out, and this mapped out. And Ned Flanders and Maud and Rod and Todd, they said, don't you have anything for Christians? And, oh yeah, we have an alternative exposition over here. And they went into another room and they were playing the song, What a Fool Believes. I don't know who sings it, but I know the song, What a Fool Believes. And they had just a finger coming down from the sky, and Adam and Eve popping up, and the animals popping up, and the birds popping up, and the fish popping up. And that's, if you're a smart person, you don't believe what Ned Flanders believes, because this is what Ned Flanders believes, and this defines what Christianity is. That is not Christianity. And yes, I will be doing more religious Christian talks in the future. I have a hashtag TATB, talking about the Bible. And so all the videos that I do where I touch and focus on biblical teaching, on Jesus, on Christianity, they are TATB, hashtag TATB, talking about the Bible. And then Sharunian says, Gordon is bright and something tall, 6 foot tall. No, I'm not 6 foot. I'm like 5'11" and a quarter. In high school, I played basketball and I was good. I was typical. In high school, I was always the top scorer on my team. And we were short and I had to play forward, and sometimes I had to play center. And I could dunk. You had to give me 15 tries, but I could get it down 1 in 10, 1 in 15. I could dunk a basketball. And I was measuring my height, and I got to 5'10", 5'10 and a half, 5'10 and 3/4, 5'11", 5'11 and a quarter, 5'11 and a half. I'm like, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make 6 feet. 5'11 and 3/4, going to make it. 5'11 3/4, 5'11 and 3/4, and I stopped. I hit 5'11 and 3/4 inches, ended up a 1/4 inch shy of being 6 foot tall. And now as you get older, the discs in your back, I've heard them described as jelly donuts, and they compress, and you shrink. And I'm down to about 5'11 and a quarter, 5'11 and a half. If you measure your height early in the morning after you've been laying down and you haven't had gravity pulling down on these jelly donuts, these discs in your back, then in and around 5'11 and a half. Sharunian and I are the same height. And yeah, when I throw on my shoes or boots, I'm a 6-footer. I always found, just a side little note, I always found it funny when I was younger because I knew my height, because playing basketball, 6 foot is such a huge thing. And I'd be at a party or a get together, and there would be a guy talking to a girl, and women quite often want to know, especially girls in high school, they want to know how tall a guy is. And a guy would sit there and girl would say, "How tall are you?" And the guy would go, "Oh, I'm 6 foot." And I'd be taller than them. And I'd look down a little and go, "You're 6 foot?" They go, "Oh yeah. What are you, 6'1", 6'2"? And I go, "No, I'm 5'11 3/4". "Oh, no. You must be. You've got to be 6'1", 6'2". I'm like, "No, I play basketball. I wanted to know. I wanted to hit 6 foot. I missed it. I'm 5'11 3/4". So you got to be like 5'10", 5'9 and a half". And the guys were not happy about that. But then again, maybe I could decide to be height fluid and decide that I identify as 6'5" and demand a spot in the NBA. I identify as a 22-year-old, 6'8" power forward. And when I go out to play basketball, you have to affirm my height and age identity, and you have to play me accordingly so that my identity is confirmed. This is the absurdity of the world we live in now. Just finishing up. Simple Mind writes, "Have you heard of Kanzook? If so, what do you think of it? I have not heard of Kanzook, but when I'm done the video now, I'll look it up. Kanzook." And Sharunian, "Height liars are very common in US and Canada. People will add, it's always the way." Found it interesting in the NBA. There's a guy, Kevin Durant, he actually underestimates his height. And I think Bill Walton did too. Bill Walton, famous player with the Portland Trailblazers, and then laterally with the Boston Celtics and Larry Bird. He's listed as 6'11", but I actually think he's a 7-footer, but he liked being shorter. And then Sharunian, "Sultan Kozan is 8'3", and Brahm, I can't pronounce the name, 8'1", practically tallest men in the world." Actually, my youngest, my 10-year-old, was asked me how tall the tallest person who ever lived was. I said, I imagine 8 foot plus. Turns out 8'10", 8'11". He looked it up. I gave him a copy of the Guinness Book of World Records for Christmas last year, the year before. And finally, Miss Christie, "Women are bad judges of length because..." Why can't women read a map? Because men keep telling them that this is 6 inches. That's bad humor. But whatever the case. And explaining what this Kanzook is, Simple Mind says, "You can look it up, but essentially it's a revived union between Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK." Okay. And that's my video. So thank you very much. I've gone on for an hour and 15 minutes nearly. If you enjoyed this, I think I was a little more animated tonight. And I think then that's largely thanks to everyone. That's Simple Mind, Sharunian, Miss Christie, who showed up at the beginning, Gerald Sumner, everyone who chimes in on these. It gives me a boost, and it gets the synapses firing a little better, helps me out. So thank you I got 7 likes. Appreciate that very much. If you want to subscribe and help me on that march to 1,000, it's appreciated. And likewise, if you want to fill the comment field down below after this is posted, you're most welcome. I try and answer most. If anyone puts down a thoughtful comment, I will almost always do my best to respond to it. And if you want to share this, you're more than welcome to do that. So good night, everyone. God bless. And we'll see you in another few nights. The next one I'm going to talk about why we still have 20 to 25% of Canadians who are still willing to vote for Justin Trudeau's Liberals. And I think I have a fairly decent understanding as to the reason why. Personally, I think it should be under 10. And, let's face it, there are some people who are dumber than sacks of dirt. But I don't think it should be anywhere near as high as what it is right now. But I think I understand the reason why. And it's got nothing to do with Trudeau. It's got everything to do with his handlers and those framing things around him and the way they're able to sell it to, unfortunately, some regrettable people, but who aren't necessarily stupid. It's just they've got a worldview that's different. And I think it's incumbent upon individuals such as myself and anyone here. We got to be loud. We got to be bold. We have to use our voice. We have to be like Jonah, not go the other way, get out, talk loud, talk bold, and, take him down. It would be nice to see him resign. It would be nice to see his polling numbers go so down that there was a revolt around the caucus table and that the Liberal Party would throw him overboard. There's another Jonah reference. Like the sailors did on the boat that Jonah was on. They threw him overboard because the ship is sinking. So, and then maybe Trudeau would see the light. Maybe he would go down into the depths of hell like Jonah did and repent. We can hope, we can pray. Anyway, God bless. Talk to you again. Probably be Sunday night when I do the next one talking about that. So God bless. And Simple Mind, glad you found me. And I appreciate you chiming in. Talk to you soon. Night all.